reflection in the small, steel-like mirror hanging above the built-in desk, Tessa no longer recognized the woman she'd become. Her blonde hair was now streaked with thick stripes of silver. Her once bright blue eyes were now as dull as the mop-water-colored prison walls that stared back at her. 10 years living, if you could even call it that, in a 7-foot by 10-foot cell could do that to a person. She stared at the steel hinges that held her single bunk to the wall. Her bed was a thin, blue and white striped dingy mattress atop rusted springs that creaked with every twist and turn. And the worn gray wool blanket on the bed, which she'd learned to make with military precision, was nothing more than a nighttime battleground. Underneath that blanket, she fought the demons that haunted her dreams at night and tormented her days. She'd adjusted to life in prison as well as anyone could under the circumstances. But the anger that grew deep inside her with each day spent behind bars was now barely containable. 10 years of incarceration for a crime she had not committed, of complete and utter hell, had infested and darkened her soul. The clank of metal against metal, a shrill cry, a moan from someone in the depths of prison passion, were so common now that she hardly noticed them. Each day was the same as the 1,000 next and the one before it. In the beginning, she'd simply curled up at the corner of her bunk at night, fearful of what might happen if she fell asleep. Given the nature of her supposed crime, she was immediately ostracized by the other inmates. Other than former cops, baby killers received the worst treatment inside prison. Dinner time was the worst. The other inmates chanting the words baby killer, greeted her as soon as she entered the utilitarian cafeteria each day. It wasn't unusual for a spoonful of food to fly across the cafeteria, smacking her in the face, or to have a glob of instant mashed potatoes smashed in her hair as though she were nothing but a thing to torment. As hard as it was, Tessa refused to fight back. After a few years, she blended in, just like the others. She was a number, an inmate, a convicted murderer. She would die here in Florida's Correctional Center for Women. No one would care. There would be no memorial service to honor the person she'd been. Nothing. She would be carted out in a pine box, and from there, she would most likely be buried in the state cemetery, where all the other inmates who had died were laid to rest. Stop, she told herself. Stop! It was these thoughts that would kill her, not the other murderers and drug addicts, not the child molesters and rapists housed in the men's prison across the road. No, she would not die at their hand, but her own, if she continued to allow her thoughts to return to that day, now almost 11 years ago. She had died that day, because since the moment she discovered the dead bodies of her husband and twin daughters floating in their pool, bobbing up and down, like the red and white bobbers used by fishermen, she'd had no life. Nothing would change the devastation of what her family had suffered. There was no going back. To this very second, she was as traumatized as she'd been the day the words, "guilty of murder in the first degree," filled the courtroom. Nothing would ever bring her a moment of happiness. Nor did she deserve it. If only she'd stayed home that weekend instead of racing to the mainland to prepare for an indefinite stay with the girls. The memory of that last day was all too clear to her now, very clear, having emerged in bits and pieces during her 10 years in prison. If only she could turn back the hands of time. Chapter 1. October, 2021. Tessa rolled over, facing the same wall she'd viewed for more than 10 years. 37 cracks, 190...